my pleasure now to introduce our fantastic panel of speakers who are going to be sharing some of their insights on this topic, moving the dial on diversity. So I think Vanessa and I, who jointly run Morgan McKinley, it's a topic very close to our hearts. The last few years, we've actually formalised a programme of work which has included a few sort of specialist workshops to help some of our key clients navigate this and help some of their females in their organisations step up to senior leadership roles. Another part of what we've done is really look at some research pieces, and we actually produced a report earlier this year on why we're not actually seeing some of the tangible results we'd hoped for with all the focus and attention on this topic. And it's my pleasure to now introduce Claire Braund, Executive Director, Women on Boards, who is our chair of the panel today. Claire is a huge advocate in this space and is a real powerhouse and a force to be reckoned with. So I'll really hand over to you. Thanks, Claire.
Women across leadership is so much more than about boards. And for many women, we have not been moving the needle fast. And so it hasn't been shifting. It's been shifting slowly. And particularly for women in those senior roles, people keep on saying, you know, when's it really going to change? When's step change really going to happen? And there's companies who are saying to us, look, guys, we're doing everything, but what more can we do? Well, one of the reasons we've got this panel together is that they are all voices and they are all people who have achieved real change. They are people who are thinking about some quite disruptive types of innovations and disruptive steps that can be taken. So what we're hoping out of this is if you can take nothing else, you can scribble on the back of an envelope or on the back of a serviette. Please don't take it with you, it probably would be stealing. However, really what we're looking for is for you to take one or two really good ideas back to your workplace that are practical, that can be implemented, because that's what it's about. I'm going to start with Rhonda, because Rhonda is now in the lovely position of, in fact, being a free agent. So she can say lots of stuff, which doesn't work for anyone now. So, what do you think? You've had major roles, you are really deeply embedded in that whole talent, diversity, people, culture kind of stuff. How well do you think we're managing structural change?
It's an awesome question. So let's start the conversation disruptively, because that's what we want to be. If the question and the objective of how we're managing talent is that we want to retain society of the 1950s, I think we're doing it brilliantly well. And we will continue to do that well. And that's a flippant answer to a serious question. I think one of the deepest structural influences we have on gender diversity, or on any diversity, is the way that we're approaching talent. And the way we approach talent is a race to find people between the ages of 28 and 35 with high potential, so that we can over-invest in them, over-sponsor them, and give them lots of opportunities. And of course, that age group happens to coincide with when 73% of the Australian population of women have children, and a further 5% go through IVF. So we're not at our sparkly best always in that age period, and that's the period when we're picking our leaders of the future. Now, the reality is that great potential can be 22, great potential can be 52, great potential can be 72, and it doesn't take into account that we are living longer, working longer, and reach our potential and the highlight of our career at very different ages than we're used to in the 1950s. And that's what I would say to the question.
John, are you seeing that come up at all through the McKinsey work around age?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely right. And we see that not just through our research, but in our own firm, that's a critical age. It's a critical age when a lot of our consultants, our women, are going through a global election process. It's incredibly stressful, and we're expecting them to cope with that at the same time, starting a family, having leave. Just not going to work. So when you look at root causes, why women are underrepresented at the top of our firm and the top of most firms, this is the sort of thing that has to change.
What does success really look like for flexible working?
I think ultimately flexibility, I think absolutely to your point, you know, the way that we think about the way we need to work, we all congregate in the same place at the same sort of time, and then we all go, it is really creaking, and I think there's a lot of stuff going on around that. So I personally think that the success factors are that both the organisation and the individual are getting what they want and what they need. And sometimes, like any negotiation, there isn't going to be one single, no one's going to get everything. But if you can get somewhere in the middle, I think everybody's probably doing pretty well. And then, it can swing either way. I think there are formal, flexible working practices and there are informal ones. And I think that actually managers are more empowered than they think to make the informal ones happen. I think, I travel an awful lot. I mean, actually, I work pretty flexibly. And there are times when I am just unavailable because I'm on a plane, and that could be the right time zone for calls in certain places. But the organisation and people can flex and bend, of course they can, based on need and availability. And my availability is based on a whole heap of different things. I'm also a mother of 2 kids, and I have a husband who works and travels and all sorts of other things. And so I recognise that I'm in a senior role, and so people may defer to my diary, and I try very hard for that not to always be the case. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here today is making sure that younger women, or women, are staying engaged in the workforce through the different stages of their lives. But I do think that having the dialogue where you're having reasonable conversations with your manager and your organisation about what's going to work for everybody is a really important thing. And it's not just the benefits that flow on for the broader group and the broader team, the men and the women. The man who's got 2 dogs who's been locked up inside the house for 12 hours and he needs to get home to let them out. He may be single, or the gay guy who always gets the dud deal because he hasn't got any kids to go home to, so he can stay late and do the work. I mean, I think everybody having conversations about what people's needs and wants are and what the organisation needs and wants is probably the key.
I think quite often you see a difference between the way corporates are handling things and the way clubs, the way bigger not-for-profits and those kind of things. You probably get a nice flavour of what's going on because you work with so many different companies. Do you think enough is being done? Where are the pockets of good progress and where are we perhaps lagging?
Well, I think as Winston Churchill said, I'm an optimist. There really doesn't seem much point in being anything else. and I'm an optimist too. So I probably do get a bit of a biased view because of the companies we work with. We self-select a little bit. We want to work with the leaders. Things like Male Champions give me exposure to people who get it. But I am seeing progress. There's a but. I'll come to that. Why am I seeing progress? Because lots of just about every corporate has bold targets that they need to do better. They are taking initiatives, right? Whether that is making sure there's 50-50 or better on shortlists, whether that's the all roles flex, whether that's just symbolic sponsorship, mentoring in their organisations that filters down. There's a lot going on and a lot being done. Here's the but though. This is an immense cultural change that's needed in our organisations in Australia. And we study this a lot, all types of cultural change, whether it's the way you do your operations or your marketing or your strategy. 2/3, 3/4 of them fail. That's a fact, right? 2/3 of these changes people set out on actually fail. And it's going to be no different. We've got to appreciate how hard this is. And we have to explicitly change things and disrupt things. Because if we don't, the system, and it's about the system, I think in the Morgan McKinley report it was quite good, this is not changing women, this is changing the system. If we don't explicitly include women, then the system will just, naturally exclude them. That's not right. So I'm seeing a lot of change, seeing a lot of actions. Actions aren't enough. We need real conscious effort at all levels of a company on the cultural change, the capabilities, the incentives, the role modelling that goes on if we're really going to turn the tide here.
I think the changes that are coming through will now be helped by a couple of angles. The first thing, the ageing population cliff that we've now hit will give us the same emphasis that the war gave us in terms of saying we need more people contributing, there's not enough of us and we need to work longer. And all of a sudden groups that we've sidelined, like women, like people with profound disability, will have to come into the workforce because otherwise we will not have a sustainable economy. So that's going to help us. The second thing is a social change where men are now assuming that their partner will want a career. Women are now assuming that their husband or partner will want to be a role in parenting. However the family comes together, single parent, traditional family, same-sex family, doesn't matter. Those families are all saying we want different flexibility and it's individual. That social change is now so loud, as we've seen this week, that we're starting to go, the rules changed. And when the rules change, I think we've got an opportunity to really do deep social change, and that's where we're up to. But we do need to understand that things like, and the biggest example that's been very topical is equal pay, is that the law around equal pay has been live in New South Wales, for example, since 1958. So we can't come into this problem with a smugness and say, you know, now that we're here, it's easy and you just get outraged and do this. It's not going to be easy. There's really smart people who've been trying to solve this problem for 70 plus years. And if we're going to solve it, we're going to need to think deeply, systemically, structurally about everything that needs to change. Policy, aggregate exposure, data, and also the micro level when you look at an actual example where pay is not right and saying, why is that so? And those three levels need to come together at the same time. It's very hard, but it's absolutely worth doing because otherwise we will stay stuck in the society that we're stuck with today.
One thing I'd add to Rhonda's comments, and Claire, you and I touched on this the other day about, you know, there's a little bit of a pincer effect, I think, happening where, you know, millennials, and I'm not one to buy too much into the generational kind of piece, but are demanding the sorts of things that, quite frankly, I want to work in that workplace too. And I think that it's a workplace where people are measured on output and there is flexibility and a mature approach to, well, I don't really mind where you do it, but you just get it done. And actually, it's really important to me that I create space for my volunteer work or whatever it may be in that kind of younger generation. I mean, I can't think of a reason why anybody would not want to work like that, no matter what generation you're at, no matter what your life circumstances are. So certainly in our organisation, you know, where we agonise over, you know, and compete with people like McKinsey for the best and the brightest that come out of universities, you know, the ask and the expectation about what they want from us as a workplace, the bar is going up, and we are being forced to change from a bottoms-up effect as well as a kind of top. So pleasingly, the pressure is coming from everywhere, which is certainly sharpening people's minds to it.
My name's Jenny Devine. I'm from TaxScope and I specialise in tax. The comments from the Liberal Party about merit, and we can see the results of apparently merit-based promotion within that party. When we look at a lot of females, they've had years out bringing up a family for which they will never be given official recognition. But for most parents, their skill sets, you know, their ability to lead a range of people, even when they're screaming on the floor, it increases dramatically. So in a corporate context, how do we start to redefine what merit is, because it's also personal characteristics which are going to help bring an organisation forward?
An excellent question. Thank you very much. Rhonda, I'm going to ask you to kick off with that. It's a really thorny question, dear old merit.
Because there's two sides to what you just asked. So the first thing is meritocracy requires exceptional leadership. And in most organisations, even really great organisations, and there are many of them, you don't consistently get great leadership. You get good leadership, great leadership, bad leadership, and everything in between. And so merit is, by definition, as good as the leader. And if the leader can't do it that way and they're not looking at outcomes, they're not looking at measurements, they're just waiting for self-promotion, whatever it happens to be. So leadership is one part of that answer. And so maybe, I'm very apolitical, but maybe the Liberal Party could look there. Am I allowed to say it?
Yes, say what you like.
Okay, the second part to it is when you look at the differences between men and women, and there's a rising tide of conversation around this, is that there is value, exactly as you've described, on the role that many women play, 73% of us, to child caring, or whether it be elder parent caring, that we shoulder the burden of that, or the joy of it, whichever way you want to look at it. And that is worth something. It is a valuable skill set. It is a valuable life experience that should be recognised as part of the whole person that comes to work. And that's been a missing piece. And at the moment, we've got people like, I had a conversation with Barbara Kellerman, who's been an outspoken advocate for about 40 years on this topic. And she said, I am never writing on gender diversity again, not until we accept there's a physiological difference between men and women and it's valuable to be a woman. And I thought, yeah, bring it on. Like, this is a good conversation.
Other comments? Kate?
I absolutely agree with Rhonda. We've done a lot of work. My CEO, Simon Rothery, is also a Male Champions of Change, and we did quite a bit of work around the role of the leader and the impact, the shadow that a leader can cast across a range of things. And I agree with you. Great organisations have a full range of leaders, and the influence that they have is not insignificant on an individual and a broader basis. I think that's right. Life experience, of course, is important. We do, when I say we, I'm sure all of us, when we're thinking about people, we bring our whole selves to work. We bring our surf life saving experience, our sailing experience, our child rearing experience. And my husband brings his, part-time single parent experience to work every day as well. So I think, getting beyond this, what measuring, what school did you go to, these sorts of things, particularly the more senior you get, is key. But it's not easy, especially if you're an unknown walking into a new job without any equity in an organisation, and it's very hard to convey that. But I think if we can crack that, we'll be on the way.
So, John, why aren't we more Scandinavian in our approach and value parenting and value... In fact, the Business Council wants more and more skilled workers. So the two great things you do for your country is you work and you have kids, which are future little tax-paying units when you think about it. So why don't we make those two concepts mutually inclusive? And what are the barriers in organisations that are in fact preventing that kind of thinking?
And you're right to mention Scandinavia as a case study. If I look at Sweden, I look at Norway, that give a year's parental leave shared between parents, all paid, which we've started doing, by the way, as well now. Males absolutely can access father's parental leave as well. But if you look at Norway, Sweden, they are at the top of the charts for gender diversity on their executive teams. They are at the top of the charts for above median earnings in those companies. So we can learn. But what are the barriers? Now, I'll tell you a story, a bit of failure on our part that we learned from as well. So, McKinsey's a values-driven thing. We've had the same values 90 years, and one of them is a caring meritocracy. So, of course, we're going to do all this on merit, and of course we'll include life skills in parenting. It's just what we are, and that's what I thought, but it's not the case. And why wasn't it the case? It's because of what I call unconscious bias. And it's well-intentioned leaders that want to be merit-based and want to cover all life skills and the outcome you get, not just how you demonstrate it. They want to do that, but there is a natural human bias that we look at things that we want people to be like us. We want people to succeed the way we succeeded. We want people to learn from us as leaders. And, it's a fact, right? This bias, I guess everyone in the room, me too, is going to have these unconscious biases, and you have to consciously do something about it. Otherwise, they are going to creep into those evaluation processes. And we audited, we looked for the language, actually analysed the language, and we found that people were saying things like, can she go toe-to-toe with a hostile CEO? Does she have command of an audience? Right? So what's that about? So stop, right? And now we have explicit roles in our people discussions reviews that call out stop, because you know what, you may not need to go hostile toe-to-toe, toe-to-toe with a hostile CEO. If you're used to getting a 9-year-old to get dressed for school and actually put them, it's probably a better skill that's going to help you there. And it's thinking about the outcomes that you get, and how you get those outcomes can draw on life skills. So again, it was a huge move for us. It took a lot of effort from people who thought they were getting it right. So boy, we've got a long way to go. Unconscious biases, get conscious about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And in big organisations, you were at Qantas for quite a long time, they get embedded sometimes, don't they, within particular areas, and it's difficult to get them out.
I think to that point as well, there's that UN paper now on the falseness of merit-based recruitment, because it talks about the Howard and Heidi study, where exactly the same resume but with a different name on it, and the name that got picked out more was Howard. And then the New York Philharmonic Orchestra when they shifted to blind auditions, they shifted their recruitment of women from 10% to 45%. And I mean, it's real. But by talking about it and exposing people through all levels of the organisation to the fact that it exists, you would hope that it has to change. And I think that all of us that have children as well, that we can support them to look at the world through a different lens and have different expectations. I certainly know with the kids from a very early age, the boys know how to stack the dishwasher, do their washing, iron their clothes, help with the cooking. So they've grown up in an environment where, you know, it was a practical consideration on my part. I just knew I wasn't Superwoman. But, you know, they've grown up in an environment where this is all just normal. And, you know, we need to make that happen for the next generation.
Suzanne, a CEO of the Melbourne Storm, several CEOs ago, I have to point out, because there's been a bit of a rotating door there, said the great thing that he learnt was to fire fast and hire slowly, because he was hiring at the time for a CFO for the organisation, I think a CFO and a COO, and they had a whole lot of applicants, and they had 250 applicants because all the blokes and everybody wanted to be the CFO for the Melbourne Storm. And he said he had his top 12, and interestingly there was about 6 men grouped at the top, but he did a really slow process, and he did about 3 to 4 rounds of interviews, and then he did some checking, and then he did all sorts of things. And he said it was actually fascinating to watch the weightings change and to watch that shift, and he wound up with a woman in the top CFO job and the woman in the top COO job who had not been the loudest, not made the biggest claims, but he said it was his great learning was to hire slowly. And I'm wondering whether that's something that flows through. We often do things very quickly and we sort of have it all and we tick it all off, and we don't allow those natural processes to actually happen.
Yes, and to not always be the loudest or the tallest, or, you know, those things that are looked at quickly. Oh yes, that fits, and I feel comfortable hiring this person because they're kind of like me. There is a female, I'm mentoring the female CFO for the Melbourne Storm, so you'll be pleased to know we do have a female in that role. But I also think it's really important that we hold the recruitment agents that we're using, if that's internal or external, that we hold them accountable. So we certainly got some feedback for a role that we were hiring through the marketplace, never a good place to get negative feedback from, that the recruiter had said something along the lines of, we know you don't want a girl for this role. Girl, or female or woman, but still, you know, to get that back from the market, we said, well, why would you make that assumption? Oh, well, because it's the NRL. And I was like, yeah, but I'm at the NRL. And probably 50% of our team in our head office is female. And people were surprised by that fact. So I think holding both the leadership accountable, but also the people that we are sourcing candidates through, holding them accountable for the language that they use and their processes is really important. Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much. My name's Deanna Vargo. I'm on one of the only females on an executive of 5 at the Australian National Maritime Museum. I'm going to ask the panel to make a comment on a statement, and I appreciate my statement is a little bit controversial. I'm a female who's chosen not to have children, and in a lot of the conversations that I hear about diversity, there is a very big sway, naturally, to people who've made the choice to have children, and therefore their reason for not progressing is around family breaks or breaks around that nature. Adding to that, a woman who is ambitious and driven, going back to some of the comments the panel has already made about if you do blind testing, a woman who is ambitious is seen as, you know, aggressive, expletive, and a man is seen differently. So just a comment about diversity. If we took the parenting argument out of it, where does diversity sit?
Rhonda, I'm going to ask you this question because you've managed a lot of this area.
Yeah. So the reality is that if you look at most senior women, is that the stats are about 50% of them have children and 50% don't. So that means that the first 50% that don't have children women, actually come from 22% of the population who choose not to have children. So it's a small group and they're representing a lot of senior roles. So the odds and stats are stacked against women with children, which is why people go to that debate. Now, having said that, there's a massive part of this social change, which, you know, when I mentioned before about social change as a friend to us at the moment, is that there are women who have chosen not to have children or haven't had children, and men who've chosen not to have children or haven't had children. And in those groups, those people are still saying, but I have a life. And as a consequence, that the exodus of women in particular from corporate roles because of the way work is structured inside corporate environments in the ages of 45 plus at the moment is absolutely extraordinary. And I think that will be another social change when people, for whatever reason, children, no children, whatever, life, are saying, I choose not to work a 7-day week. And that will change the way we have to look at work. So I think that it isn't just about women with children. It is about people with other things in their life other than work, although work is an important part and that's where ambition comes in. If you go back to where we choose our roles, and we go back right to gender schemas from our childhoods, which we've all got, is it just depends how you grew up with that mindset. I grew up in a single parent family with just a mum. She was an awesome mum doing 2 jobs. And as a consequence, I got that women did everything. They mowed the lawn, they made dinner, and we helped. That's how life worked. I married a guy who grew up with just a dad, and he was the same. We divide up the jobs in our house based on who wants to do them and can be bothered. And that's it. And it's not very hard, you know. So if we start to think differently about the homework as well as the work, I think that's another gold mine of opportunity where we can divide it up differently.
My question is around, there's obviously a lot of structural and systemic thinking going around how everyone should accept diversity in the workplace. In a number of male-dominated companies, there is a deep-seated skepticism about the entire approach. What can women in roles do to make sure that they bring the men along?
Okay, bringing the men along. It's been an important issue. How do you bring the men along? Well, you've got lots of men down, well, they're all playing football. How do you bring them along? A bit like herding cats? No, sure.
Look, I think that's probably, certainly one of the skills that I have drawn on in my career. I remember being told when I was at Qantas that you're odd. You do a fantastic job and you get the results. You just do it differently. Because I didn't bang my fist, I didn't stand up and yell at people. That just wasn't how I led teams. And by the time I brought stuff to the table for a decision, I'd brought the stakeholders on the journey because I'd gone and had coffees with them or talked to them and brought them on the journey to get there. It's no different with the gender journey. We need to, if it's one person at a time that we need to convince, then that's what we need to do. But I think, continuing the conversation is really important and, challenging it. And challenging, I had, this is funny, in an executive meeting the other day, there was no coffee. And one of the guys said to me, Suzanne, what happened to the coffee? I said, I know, you didn't give me one. But it's just his immediate, and he's a lovely, fantastic man. But his immediate assumption, because I was the only female in the room, was to ask me why the coffees hadn't turned up. So
He won't ask again.
He won't ask again. But I think we need to challenge.
Quickly from the other 3 before we close. John, what do we do to change the men or work with the men, influence the men?
I mean, it's a shame it's needed, right? Because the belief that men need to step up alongside women, that's what Male Champions is all about. We had something, though, that helped me a lot, which is reverse mentorship, where a junior, new starter graduate MBA was giving me advice. And that, by the way, massively improved my IT skills. I'll give you that as well. But this was a really important issue, and I found out what I had to do and what the expectations of women just starting in McKinsey were, much more clearly through that official program that legitimised giving me, what they really thought, than would have ever filtered up to me by the normal channels. So that's something you can think about, like reverse mentorship of your senior men.
Okay.
Again, if there was one single thing, I think we'd all be doing it. But, you know, perhaps one thing to think about is, I think you need to have an emotional connection. To be passionate about anything, you need to have some kind of emotional connection. And so for some men, that is, they have young daughters, or they have daughters who are coming out into the workplace. For some men and leaders, it's about a commercial imperative, which is the idea is probably better if you've had different brains around it. For other people, it's the right thing to do. There's a whole heap of different reasons. So I kind of think that, again, you know, one thing to think about is just pick them off one by one. Find out what's going to make them passionate about it. Educate them, you know, and keep going. And it doesn't take care of itself. It's a day by day, decision by decision, mistake by mistake. Oops, I didn't mean that. Don't hold it against me. Let's move on. You know, I'm coming from a good place type of exercise. And everybody's going to keep moving together on it, I think.
Which comes back to, Rhonda, the drivers that we have, and in the end it's really all about people. And we were talking earlier that in fact we have a lot to learn from our Indigenous people who inherited the land first, and really we don't think it's all about people sometimes, and we have a lot to learn around that, don't we?
I think if you're not working and listening to the story of the Aboriginal people, then do it, because they've got so many great lessons of leadership in there. And it is about collective leadership. It is a maternal culture, so it's got lots of really interesting ways of looking at how we lead. And to the question of how do you take people on the journey, one of the things the Aboriginal people do so beautifully is this amazingly gorgeous sense of humour. And you can get away with so much more if you're funny and smiling than you can if you're mean and angry. So, as simple as it sounds, one of the funniest conversations I ever heard was a very senior guy, and this person put their hand up and said, look, if you've got a 35% target for women on senior leadership, what does that mean to me? My career is over. And he just said, well, women make up 70% of our workforce. We're going to offer them 35% of the top jobs. That means the other 65 are up for you. And everybody thought that was really funny, but it was really right. And I think that's a way of doing it too, but I think the suggestions made by the panel are also really good.